Hello, I'm Mayor Ted Wabi of St. Clair Shores, and welcome to another edition of the Mayor's Corner. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the past history of St. Clair Shores. We have some real entertaining guests that are going to take us back into the years of St. Clair Shores. We have with us Gus Blumlein. Gus.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And Emerson Belmore.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And welcome to the show, guys. And we're going to talk. Emerson has been, what, a resident, what, 60?
It's 67 years.
67 years that he's been a resident of St. Clair Shores, and 54 years of those you were in the Shorewood Kiwanis, is that right?
No, sir. I think Gus misled you there.
Is that right?
I was in St. Clair Shores, Kiwanis.
Okay.
That's right.
All right, well, we get fined if we don't mention Shorewood, so we have to mention Shorewood. Well, one of the things that we had a show that we did a while back here about, with Tom Wilson, and Gus was on a show also, Emerson, about things that went on in the history of St. Clair Shores. And you were a former village commissioner.
That's right.
What year was that?
Oh, gosh, that was in the 40s.
In the 40s. Okay, so one of the things that a lot of transition happened back from the time we were a village of St. Clair Shores till we became a city of St. Clair Shores. And one of the things that a lot of people ask me, and it's very difficult to get the history on, is how did Grosse Pointe Woods get a piece of St. Clair Shores real estate to call it a park?
That's a good question. For one thing, that was Lake Township. And in Lake Township, they paid the taxes to South Lake. And in that way, they kept everything going that end of the town. And so they didn't let us know too much about there until Ford's came in. And when it comes to talking about Ford property down there, I'm referring back to Gus because he was, in his childhood, and that was a long time ago, had a lot of activity down there. What do you say, Gus?
Well, you mushrat, you, I think you're probably right. I started working at Ford's when I was 15, and I walked through the gate one day looking for a job, and I was looking for Nick Vanderpoort, the gardener, and Tom Laughlin was the guard at the gate, and he sent me down to the lake. They were cleaning up along the edge of the lake, and I told him I was looking for a job, and he handed me a rake, and he said, "Here, start raking, see what you can do." So of course, I wanted the job real bad, so I guess I put on a pretty good performance. He's all right. And he said, "Jim Brolia will pick you up at 7:30 tomorrow. He goes right by your house and start work for 90 cents an hour." I didn't want to sound overjoyed, but to me, 90 cents an hour for an unemployed kid, that was pretty good. So I started working there, and I worked there for 5 years. And then I got drafted, and I went back and worked for a little while. Went in the Army for 2 years, and then I went back as part-time. While I was on the police department, I'd work part-time as a watchman, guard, and a chauffeur. That piece of property that we're talking about where the Grosse Pointe Woods acquired their park, Lakefront Park, that always was a bitter story, and it didn't make any difference to me at that point because I was just a kid and I could care less. I had the whole lake to swim in and you know, hunt and trap and fish. I didn't need that park, but Grosse Pointe Woods needed it. Grosse Pointe Shores had their park down next to the yacht club, and St. Clair Shores, I think if you recall, we were building Memorial Park at that time, I think. Right. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And,
right.
Right in the early 50s. And so I don't know if it was disinterest or if the money was too much and they couldn't afford it, but that was a pretty good piece of property. The original estate, Ford Estate, went all the way up to Mack Avenue, and it would comprise hundreds of acres. Now, what's left right now, the main part of the estate, is about 60 acres of manicured property. Well, this next piece that Grosse Pointe acquired was just like fields, but it was separated from the original one with a chain link fence, and it was right on the lake, right on the bay of Gloucester Point. And when Etzel died in '43, Mrs. Eleanor Clay Ford, Etzel's wife, thought about selling the whole shot. She was going to sell it and move out. And she had probably 40 or 50 gardeners. And she laid them all off, and she just kept a skeleton crew around the house, and she kept some watchmen. She kept 2 gardeners, one to work around the house to keep the bushes trimmed and clean up around there. And she kept one guy, Jim Brolia, for the heavy equipment operator because they needed a snow plow and a snow brush and the big lawnmowers, because what they called the big meadow was a big lawn. It was probably 30 acres of nothing but solid grass. So she kept those two fellows there, and she started selling things off, the boathouse, the tennis court, and various parts of the estate. And she decided to sell this piece of property because that's where the Milk River ran through. And she didn't feel like she needed it. Her kids were all grown, and there wasn't, it was a place for them to play when they were younger. But at this point, she didn't need it. So she offered it for sale, and I'm sure she could have cared less. That's a difficult thing to explain to anybody because it's on the borderline of Macomb County and Wayne County. That line cuts right through there. It's on the borderline of Grosse Pointe Shores and St. Clair Shores. You could be standing by the implement shed, and Ted could be standing in the garden 2 feet away, and he'd be in St. Clair Shores, and you'd be in Grosse Pointe Shores. And then there was Lake Township, and that was right smack dab in the middle of it. And as you alluded to before, that's probably one of the reasons that the 3 school districts stayed 3 school districts all those years, because those people were getting all that money from the Ford properties, and they weren't about to divvy that up with the other 2 school districts. So that may be where it started. But
You understand now, Mayor, why I said it was very complicated, and he has a better voice?
I probably got it more screwed up now.
Let me ask you
But
a question, and then what you're saying in essence is that my understanding was that that property was donated to Grosse Pointe Woods, not sold to them.
not to my understanding, it was sold. There was a big piece of change involved in there.
So actually what happened was Grosse Pointe Woods bought a piece of property owned by the Ford estate, which is in St. Clair Shores.
Yes, exactly.
And turned it into a park.
Turned it into a park. And
See that I'm getting enlightened a little bit, because the previous story I had was that she got into a tussle with who was then our village president, and there was some sour grapes there, and she decided that she gave it to Grosse Pointe Woods. So
Well,
that's the story that I'd heard.
I've heard that story too, Ted, but I worked for the woman for probably
then you know better.
8 or 10 years, and with her personality, she's not going to get into something like this. She wouldn't have, and perhaps someone along the line, the real estate company may have, but then I've known Adrian Lingeman all my life too, and he was the village commissioner, superintendent, and neither one of those two people were the type that would be getting into something like that. The only sad part about it is, I understand they're paying taxes now, but at that time they weren't paying taxes. So here's a big chunk of property in St. Clair Shores that was not getting any tax revenue from. But I think they had a little guilt complex, because I know when I first started on the police department in '53, the police and fire departments, because we had to police it, if anything happened down there that was in our bailiwick, it was our venue, they gave us free passes, and I can remember using their swimming pool, because we didn't have one yet in St. Clair Shores. We just had the beaches, which half the time at that point they were contaminated. So we used the facilities down there. And to me, the sad part about it was, after I finished work, one of my buddies and myself, whoever happened to want to, would go hunting in that piece of property. And it was all fenced in, so it kept your predators out, except us mushrats, And every night, I'd go out there and knock off a couple pheasants or rabbits, whatever, whatever came up went down, and I'd bring it home and we ate it. We supplemented our diet with that. So
basically right now, then my understanding after that, it was tax-free. They were not paying taxes. Then it was challenged, and my understanding was that they wanted to get Orville Hubbard because he had Camp Dearborn, which is not in Dearborn, and he wasn't paying taxes for that either. And my understanding was they finally got him to go along and not fight it. And I guess they petitioned Lansing. My understanding is now we get in excess of $80,000 a year in taxes. But there's a lot of people who to this day want to know why Grosse Pointe Shores has got a park in St. Clair Shores, and Grosse Pointe Woods. And
well, that's the story.
So the story, I think hopefully we've cleared it up enough to. I know I understand it now, but there was a lot of talk about that. Let's go back to when you were a village commissioner, and I had a newspaper here which Gus brought to me, and I'll tell you, just to read you a couple of. Whoops, there goes my. Talk about garbage. Garbage today is one of the biggest problems we have, and here they can't see the picture on here, but there's a picture of a good-looking young guy by the name of Emerson Belmore. He's got a hat. It looks like a movie star there. But anyhow, they talk about taking bids on garbage, and the first guy to bid was he's going to collect the garbage once a week, except for the months of June, July, and August. During these months, he'll collect the garbage twice a week. Rubbish and tin cans will be collected once a month. He'll use 2 trucks, but will have a 3rd truck available if necessary to keep up the schedule. And there'll be 2 men on each truck, and his bid for picking up was $19,575 per year. How many households would we have had back in those days? Anybody got any ideas?
What is it, about 1,700, or wasn't it?
Something like that.
About 1,700. Today we got about 28,000. And the bids go on for down to 17,000. And there were quite a few guys that wanted to bid on that too. As I see here, we're down to another one says collect garbage every 2 weeks, 9 months of the year, and once a week for 3 months, and rubbish monthly. All garbage wrapped at the curb and all rubbish in containers. And the bid was $15,400. So today we're spending $1 million or more a year in garbage, and but it's just interesting when you see these, an older paper, to think about how things were in those days compared to what they are now. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things that went on back in those days. There must be some interesting stories that you've got to tell, Emerson. What can you tell us a little bit about way back when you were on the? Didn't they have a lot of problems? Were you on the commission when they were trying to get St. Clair Shores to become a city?
Yes.
Weren't there a lot of votes on that, or
Yes, there was.
public didn't want it at one time?
The public sentiment mostly was that the school districts would get so much more or less. South Lake, were getting all the money from the Ford property, so why should they consolidate with the city and bring it in? Why they would tie the school districts into the city, I don't know. But that was the public sentiment. Pretty soon they realized that the police department was needed more, the fire department was needed more, and as you saw there, garbage collection. The roads were bad, they always have been, but we had less trouble with our water mains breaking, because all we have to do is go across the gravel road on most of the main roads. 13 Mile Road, where I live, that was ditches on both sides till they got down to near the school, and there was only on one side that was improvement. Water line break, all you'd have to do is dig underneath the gravel road. What do? I saw over in Harper there the other day. Water main break, got to tear up all Harper Avenue, all paved road.
Yeah.
People don't understand that that costs money. That money that we pay for, we don't realize is going for the benefit of the taxpayers.
When you had, that's true, when you had back in those days, though, when you talked about 60-some years ago, you were in the, what, 1943 or so?
That's right.
And we had roughly, what, 1,700 homes, you say, at that time?
I'm guessing that is.
So we still had a lot of farms going, and farms that were still being farmed out here.
Oh, Fraser Farm. We used to, right here on Jefferson, we used to go down there and get our butter all the time. Up on 13 Mile Road, there's correct me,
I'm trying to think too.
Cushy's.
Cushy's
Farm. They had a small farm. It only went from Harper to Gratiot, and it included a drive-in over there and all the property where the mall is now. And we used
Went
to
all the way up there?
all the way up there.
Practically the whole north end was the Couchet. It was with 5 brothers, wasn't there?
I think there was, and there was 2 or 3 sisters.
Yep.
And it's a cute story. And it was stipulated they had money. They had a package. The only time they ever used it was go to church and then to put it up on a jack afterward. That's right. And they had one brother that never had been in Detroit. And they had so much money that it wasn't funny. And the stipulation was in the family, if they got married, they were left out. But one of the boys got married. And they had so much money and they had in the bank that when he got married, they made him the president of the bank. That's the Fraser Bank. And that's the way to protect their money. It's a cute story, and it's the truth. People wonder how they called the church over there St. Margaret's. Do you know, Gus?
No.
One of the sisters gave him the money.
I believe
Was that right?
That's true.
Well, you know, Catherine was in our historical commission for quite a few years.
And she was a smart girl.
Oh yeah, she's 90 years old. She was traveling to Australia, all over the world. She was a school teacher, very educated. And it was really cute when I first started in the police department. You'd see 3 or 4 of those guys with bib overalls on, with a hole over their back. 3 of them, 4 of them, walking down Harper, and they were going through those fields. And I used to think, God, if I had 1/10 of their money, you wouldn't see me walking down the road with overalls on. I'd be driving that Packard, you know. But they were very frugal people, and they farmed that property, and that all that Tanglewood and that whole subdivision, that was all theirs, and all around where the fire department is.
Now, were they still around? Were they the ones that sold it off for development?
Yes, and every time they'd sell something, you know, they're selling like millions of dollars worth of stuff, and the longer they kept it, the more value it occurred, and they were all very wealthy people, nice people.
So it really was early 50s when St. Clair Shores started to really build, wasn't it? After
Yeah,
it
they
became
had
a
an
city,
urge then, that's right.
and then things, actually the city kind of grew all at one time.
It was very spontaneous. 50s and 60s, and then 60s it really hit.
Were you, can you give us any stories about the old Blossom Heath or the rec centers? Do you have any stories about that you...
Let me give you some legal advice. I mean, the statute of limitations is run, so you can't be prosecuted, so go ahead and talk.
The only thing is I can say about that, myself, I'm not included.
Okay, we won't include it.
They were very, very nice people to the poor people in St. Clair Shores. They used to have the big boys, the Fishers, Dodgers, and all those come out there, and I understand, they used to gamble.
Was that right? Okay.
Oh, yeah. And they had some illegal drinks. And they were very nice. They had very good food. And everything that was left over, the poor people in the city here, village then, it was delivered to them, or they could come and get it.
Was that right?
They never had anything left over. The poor people used to come and get it, and it was wonderful. The people really admired them, and nobody bothered them until the government got heavy.
So in other words, it was kind of a freewheeling type thing. Nobody bothered anybody, and they were good to the community. But there had to be some interesting stories. Now, when did they start cracking down on that?
There's your answer, Gus.
Well, they were always cracking down on it. I think what happened, really, the demise of the Blossom Heath, it was when the Volstead Act was repealed and liquor was legal. And then we opened up our saloons, and you correct me, as far back as I can remember, and it probably goes back since day one, our village commissioners and now our city council has always maintained a balance between churches and saloons. There were always, and right now there's 33 churches and 33 saloons. And you and I have been to both of them. You've been to all the saloons, I've been to all the churches. I mean...
Knows what Happy gave you. But the history of Blossom Heath, and you can read the plaque out there that tells you the story, but wasn't the history of Blossom Heath also, didn't the Purple Gang out of Detroit have it at one time?
Well, they might have been involved in that, but there's another story. Crouchman is an avid, Bill Crouchman, our judge, he's an avid historian, and he's got a lot of material on it, and we should have him on here one of these days. One of the things he came up with is that some of the mafia working out of Detroit didn't want to come out here because they didn't want to mess with the mushrats out here. So I don't know who they were referring to as the mushrats, maybe you and Hank, but you know, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. No. I did get this nose out of shape once or twice. Somebody smacking me, I couldn't run fast enough.
But they didn't have that many raids down there, and they maintained their business right up, and then it just, things kept getting worse, and finally the lady that owned it sold it. It was originally owned by a man by the name of Matt Kramer. He had a little saloon where the Ford Estate is, and when they bought the property, he moved up to where they are now. And there was some other, there was a gambler in there too. What was his name?
I don't know, but right after that was the time that Harold Lanstra was his chief.
Sullivan? Wasn't he down there at one time?
No, he wasn't in that one.
Oh.
But that's when they started tightening it down, and Harold Lanstra's brother got killed by the Purple Gang down in Grosse Pointe.
Grosse Pointe, yeah.
That's right. When they started tightening down out here, they moved out. They tightened down tight.
So you had a lot of federal action out here in terms
Yes,
of...
they
Yeah.
did.
He was a police officer at the time he was killed, wasn't he?
That's right,
Yeah.
he was. But they didn't care who, that gang didn't care who they were or where they were at. And when the federal government come in and the police had the backing behind them, I'm not saying it because you're a policeman, does, but they really went to town. They cleaned them out.
So that kind of stopped all the illegal activity.
Yeah,
Yes, it did.
that was the end of that one.
Was the Blossom Heath the only spot out here at that time, the old Blossom Heath, or were there other pubs or places that...
Well, I don't know if Margolies did any gambling down there, the Silver Tower, the old Heidelberg, those are mostly
Oh, that's your game.
Eden claims.
But the Lido
Yeah,
was well known at that time.
The Lido?
yeah.
That's right.
Was
We
that-
called it Lido, just like we say muskrat instead of muskrat, but it should be called Lido, but
The same place it is now?
yes,
it is.
Bill Melky owned it. He was bringing booze in from Canada through the back. When I was a kid, we used to find traces of it, bottles and barrels that were rolled up on shore. And that place is full of tunnels, and I don't know how many of them have been covered up, but I spent a good part of my career down there as a kid swamping that place out. And I used to listen in on all the council meetings that went on after 2:30 in the morning after the place closed. It was an interesting place for a kid to work. I grew up fast.
I didn't realize that the Lido had been around that long.
Yeah.
Lido, as you call it
The
then.
early 20s, Bill and Gertie Melky ran the thing. He was a little short guy, a little German guy, and a big belly, and he had a beautiful tenor voice, and he'd sing, and it was closing time, they closed the drapes, and then certain people stayed till...
So basically, back in those days, at that time, there was only, what, 2 or 3 or 4 drinking establishments in the whole area?
You mean legal ones?
Yeah. No, illegal.
Well, we had that one on Maxine.
Any
where
kind, I
that,
guess.
Oh, yeah.
that milkman got killed down there,
That's
that
right.
blind pig down there,
You forgot that was
1950.
Ron Jones?
and Ron Joe's.
That's right.
Was Ron Joe's around those days, too? Where it is now?
That was another name though for
Was Rennie's or
Rendies was out there then. Was a blind pig. And
the one on Little Mac where White's Furniture was later? That was a
that's
blind
right.
pig for a while.
That was Rennie's. Then he moved over on Jefferson. Then how about the veterans?
Yeah,
What, can you remember what that was before that?
What, the VFW?
Yes?
What was it?
Turner's Summer, they had a German name.
Turner Bryan.
What was it?
Blind pig. I mean, no, it was a place where the
Blenderschwein.
where the German people, where the Turner Bryan from Detroit come out and enjoyed themselves. I didn't say it was a blind pig.
And then Beachcomber. Remember when Marie Kiesken and
Marjo,
Marjo's?
that's what they called them.
I lived right across the street, and I'd go swimming, and I'd just cut through there to go down to Murray's Beach. And as a kid, I'd hear the phone ringing all the time. I said, God, they got a lot of, of course, I'm just, 10 years old or whatever, and a lot of people calling in for dinners or engagements or whatever, phones ringing all the time. Well, of course, later on, they knocked them off. You had a bookie joint there.
Smoking joint. And used to come in the back. It was back off the road a little bit. Strange to see those big cars driving in there. What the heck are they doing in there?
Yeah. They had some clientele. See, most of the gambling joints were on Jefferson. There were a few of them on Harper, but Harper was
So they
almost
came
like a
from
trail.
Detroit and all those
Yeah,
areas
that
over
was the playground. They just come right out Lakeshore Drive and out to St. Clair Shores and up to Mount Clemens.
I happen to think of one too. Remember the one down in Jefferson, across from Jefferson Beach there? What was that?
Oh,
Mike's, you mean?
Mike's Palm Room.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mike's Palm Room?
That's right.
That was when Red Gorman was running.
Red Gorman.
We knocked him off too, and that was after I got in the police department.
Did you stay on as a village commissioner? Did you run for office, or were you a part of the when it became a city?
No, I did not run then. I was on there long enough as a village because I made a mistake when I first went in, and they had it pretty well joined up with the police department where Adrian Lim was running it. And they had tires they used to get from U.S. Rubber in order to keep the cars going. And I said, that's enough of that. Like I was telling you before, I was on the police department for about a week. And I said, uh-oh, that's it. So the first meeting I went to, I said, I make a motion we buy a new police car. And he says, you're out of order. You're not the commissioner of the police. So I says, okay. So some little thing like somebody going to get a donation or something. I said, I refuse to vote until I get a confirmation on my motion. Walter Pratt was the clerk then. We can't go on like this. I said, that's right. So I went back, called a meeting in the back. Are you going to give up? I said, no, I'm not. I said, went out there and I says, I make a motion, we buy a new police car. Supported, and we got it, and from then on, it went good.
So you got a new police car.
But that was rough in those days to get a car.
Well, I've seen some old pictures that Gus has showed me about the old police department, fire department, and it's really interesting to see that, and I think it's very hard for people to really realize that this, what was out here. You know, when you see it today, it's so built up, there's nothing vacant anymore, and back in those days, you had a lot of swamp up here, as I understand it.
That's right.
A lot of swampland, and when you talk about as early as 1943, only having about 1,700 houses here, and you talk about 7 years or 8 years later, all of a sudden the big building boom.
That's right, you had 20,000,
Yeah.
30,000.
It grew, and if you track the history of St. Clair Shores, it grew very, very fast. That's why today we look at most of our streets and our sewer systems and everything are 40 years old. And that's why we've got a lot of the problems today that we have. A lot of those, we did some TVing of some of the old sewer systems that are under this concrete that's breaking up as we talk, and they're like this, like roller coasters. So we got a massive amount of sewer work that's got to be done in the city and rebuilding. And when you do that, you rebuild the concrete with it.
That's right.
But was Jefferson Avenue at that time, did they have streetcars coming out here?
Yes, they did.
How far out did they go?
Mount Clemens.
Oh, all the way to Mount Clemens?
Yes, they did.
Via Jefferson?
Jefferson, that's right.
Oh, I'll be darned.
The east side of Jefferson.
Is that right?
We got pictures of that, too.
And you talk about the pranks and the trouble they have with the kids nowadays. My dad used to have a gas station on the corner of Corville and Jefferson there. That was years ago. Drain the well outside, getting the winter time. And our pranks those days were, Sealine, when he built his house on Jefferson, that big stone house there at Corville and Jefferson, he had a son that had an airport across the back of the Lakeshore house. And our fun those days, was he used to go to Detroit all the time in the streetcar. And we knew he was going to go on a Saturday night. So we'd go out and up about halfway to 12 Mile Road and put grease on the railroad, the streetcar tracks. The old streetcars started to stop. See this old fat gentleman running down Jefferson trying to catch it. That was rough.
Well, we're going to, we've got some more guests that we're going to have on in a few minutes. We're going to break for a couple minutes to, and we'll be back with more of the show. And today we're going to spend another half an hour again discussing the history of St. Clair Shores. So we'll break for a couple of minutes.
Before you close, could I make one statement?
Sure.
Today, I was saying how the police department was then. Today, I think you've got a police department that is better than any around. They are doing a beautiful job.
Well, we thank you very much, and we feel the same way. We think
I'll
we're
give you that
second to none.
$5 after a while, I mean.
You're not on it anymore.
Yeah, but I was part of it.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and break now.
Pete Sampras comes up to serve. Jan Stevenson makes the drive. A.C. Green and Charles Smith pound the boards. Marcus Allen rushes up the middle. Jay Schrader with the touchdown. There are a lot of different parts to play in the American Red Cross. Play your part.
Welcome back to the second half of our show today. We have some interesting guests here. We have Gus, who was with us in the first half of the show, Gus Blumlein. We have Hank Mason and Henry Kraus. And Hank, you've been here, what, 60-some years a resident, or how many years have you been a resident?
78.
78 years.
57.
And Gus?
62.
62. So we have a lot of history, a lot of people here who have been here a long time. Hank, you come from one of the oldest French families with a long history here in St. Clair Shores, is that right?
The two oldest, yes.
Two oldest
That's right. The Masons and the Champagnes, yeah.
Masons and the Champagnes.
That's right.
Isn't that something? Well, we're going to talk a little bit, going back a little bit about in the history of St. Clair Shores. We had Emerson on in the first half. Tell us a little bit about, and I understand you're quite an expert, maybe to tell us a little bit about all the gambling and the blind pigs and all the other things that we had out here. So maybe you can give us a little bit more update on what was going on back in before we became a city, way back when we were a village.
Well, I think Emmy gave you quite a bit of it there in Gus, but You missed out on one gambling place that's located at, Elmira and Jefferson. It was known as Edgewater Beach. It was quite a gambling place. It was run by a fellow named Mickey McMahon. In fact, the right-of-way for Elmira right now was part of their parking lot.
Was that right?
That's right. And right next door to that, on the south side, was a state police post years back. In fact, one of the officers got killed coming out on Jefferson. He was running into the streetcar. Don Leonard, I believe, got his start there.
The going back to your family roots back here, your family had farms out here?
Oh, yeah.
Whereabouts, what areas?
12 Mile Road area. Champaigns and Masons were both there. Francis and Little Mac, Francis and Greater Mac. The Mason family, the house still stands.
Okay.
It still stands in the corner there. Of course, it's been rebuilt.
What type of a farm did they have back in those days? What did they grow? What type of...
Just a regular farmers, corn, potatoes. I don't think they grew too many tomatoes them days.
No.
They had, were there much livestock, like cattle? And...
Oh, yeah, they had cattle, yeah, they had cows. Yeah, I remember my mother used to say she'd go with her dad with a load of hay once or twice a week, you know, down to Detroit. It'd be a 3-day trip, one day down there, one day on the way down, stayed one day and come home the next day.
Down to Detroit.
Detroit to market, sell their hay.
We've got some pictures that we might want to show here, and maybe you guys can identify them. They should show on the screen here. Why don't we start maybe by showing the first picture, and you guys tell us what's on there. Can we get the picture up? What is that picture?
Oh, that's a picture of Jefferson Beach in the 30s. The fellow playing the guitar there, it's my old guitar, and in my boots is Pete Ford. He was a little Indian from Arizona. He was a barker. And the lady on the dock was Sally Rand, none other than the great Sally Rand.
The fan dancer.
The fan dancer, that's right. The one that rode with no clothes on through Chicago in a big parade.
Is that right?
That's right. She
What,
died.
what was she doing down here?
She'd come down once or twice a week with her troop of girls. She had, I think it was 68 girls. They worked at the Bowery down Detroit. They'd put on a show. And one or 2 days a week, she would come down to Jefferson Beach, spend the day on speedboats and so forth.
Okay, and what's this next picture here that we've got? Who's that?
That's part of our multi crew on the speedboats. Yeah, we run the boats down there. They were the first one.
Do you recognize some of the people there?
Yeah, I recognize just about all of them, I guess. Pete Ford, Bill Fleming, Chauncey, I forgot his name. He worked for Stanton Welsh. And Sally Rand, myself, Duke Lowe, and Don Ream.
What were you doing there?
Just taking pictures during the day, and we were given rides, but of course they had to take our picture, the whole gang of us, with Sally Rand, because she liked to surfboard, and some of her girls would come down surfboarding. A bigger part of them stayed away from us.
I wonder why.
Well, you and Bill Fleming used to fly airplane too, didn't you?
Oh yeah,
On
we
top
were
of your
both
speedboat.
pilots, yeah.
And here we have a picture of another one coming up. This is what now?
That's the lighthouse at Jefferson Beach, where we run the speedboats out of it in mid-30s.
Now,
1, 2, 3 or 4 speedboats there.
now looking at where that beach is now, where the lighthouse is now, how far inland is it compared to where today's boundary lines are? How much further are we out in the lake today than we were there?
Oh, you're half a mile further out in the lake. That
Now-
was right at the head of the roller coaster. Just a little bit to the west on that picture. To the right would be the roller coaster. So let me see.
Be right about where Brownies is now.
Right close to where Brownies is.
So where Brownie's restaurant is now is about basically where that was.
Yeah, pretty close to Brownies restaurant.
So so from there going out, we got almost a half a mile going out into the lake
You
now.
got a
that's
good
been
half a
filled.
mile out there.
Okay, that's interesting. What do we got next here? Okay. Gus, I think maybe this might be one you want to talk about.
Well, you know, Emmy alluded to the fact that we have a great police department, and of course I'm going to second that, and we have, and I'm not just saying it because I was part of it, but everybody has their bad days, and that was one that we all laugh about it now, but it wasn't so funny at the time. That's a 55 Chevy, and at that, in 55, we had just built a new bank in St. Clair Shores called the First National Bank, and it was on Harper and Trombley. Prior to that, the only bank in St. Clair Shores for most of us, at least on the police department, was the First State Bank, and that was located at Mack and Clairwood. So if you said something about going to the bank, you didn't say a bank, or you didn't name it, you just said the bank. And everybody knew you meant Clairwood and Mack. So anyhow, a lone gunman came in the First National Bank, and he was armed with a .22 rifle, and he held that's the National Bank, he held him up. Bernie St. Germain was the manager. His kid's on the police department now. And Bernie was a gutsy guy. Anyhow, they didn't have alarms like they have today, and they called. And the guy was on the desk. I won't mention his name. He's a good pal of mine. But when he got the call, he said, they just robbed the bank. He says, you got to be kidding. You know, he thought it was somebody just pulling a joke on him. So when he realized that there was a bank robbery in progress, he just grabbed the microphone. He said, they just held up the bank. So everybody down to Mack and Clairwood, you know, they're going down to the bank. Well, Bernie started following this guy. He wasn't chasing him because the guy was armed, but he wanted to keep him in sight. And this guy kept looking in the mirror, and Bernie's making him nervous because he don't know if Bernie's got a gun or what the deal is or anything. So he's going pretty fast, and he's zipping in and out of traffic. All the police cars go right on by this Chevrolet here. They're heading down to Mack and Clairwood. Well, they finally realized that somehow that somebody else called again and said, where's the cops? You know, we called 2-3 minutes ago. And then they realized they had the wrong bank, and then they deterred him. Then someone said that Bernie was chasing him. Well, he got him so damn nervous when he got up a 9 Mile Road, he ran in the back of a transit mix. And that's where he smashed the heck out of his car. And about that time, East Detroit police, this was right at 9 Mile in Beaconsfield, called and said, I think we got your bank robberies in the back of a transit mix. So we went over and put the collar on him.
So that's what happened to that car.
That's the name of that tune.
We got a small picture here. I think hopefully they can pick it up. There's two guys there with guns and a bunch of dead crows, I think. Gus, you want to tell us about that?
Well, when I worked at the Ford Estate, I think I was about 17 there. That place was like a natural wonderland. It was all fenced in with chain link fence except for the lake, so there weren't any predators in there, and it was just full of game. Anyhow, in the spring, late March, early April, the crows seem to gather, and they have like a caucus. They seem to be electing officers, and they're calling, they're yelling. And there was a lot of trees there, but there was two big trees, and they always pick out the biggest tree. And one of them was toward the gate lodge, and it was a big poplar. It was about 125 feet high. And the other one was a silver maple, and it was located right next to Mrs. Ford's bedroom window. And they'd go from tree to tree. They'd have a meeting over here, and then they'd go back over there, and and then they would use her little apple court. That was her private little court, and they would use that for all their droppings. They were making a mess. Well, I was working around the house one day, and she came out, and she asked me, she said, well, we got talking about the crows because they were kicking up on noise, and she says, oh, don't they drive you nuts? And I said, yes, ma'am. They're going like that. They're going all day, you know, and we talked about that. And she said, Gus, do you have a gun? You know, asking a mushrat if he's got a gun is kind of asking like the Pope if he says Mass on Sunday, you know. And, yes, ma'am. She said, would you kind of harass these things and maybe chase them out of here a little bit? And, yes, ma'am. So I got my buddy, and we started shooting. They're not easy to shoot. They're one of the smartest birds there are. They can tell the difference between a rake or a shovel and a gun. And you get them like one or two at a time is the best you're going to do, and you have to use all kinds of tricks. You use decoys. We use a dead crow or a dead hawk and set them up there, and they'd dive at them. Then we'd get a couple of them. Then I'd sit down in my car with the seat out and drive by with the gun out the window. Of course, at that time, crows were not protected. You could shoot all you wanted, and they were considered a nuisance, so that was no problem. And that little picture there depicts about that we didn't get those all in one day. That was probably 3 or 4 days hunting. But
Did you get rid of the crows for her?
well, that discouraged them because they couldn't have those meetings with that mushrat down there shooting at them all the time, you know. So they moved over. They went over to the next estate down in Lakeshore Drive. That drove him out of there. But she kind of took a liking to me at that point, and it made the older guy mad, the guy that was in charge, because she'd come out and ask me questions that I really couldn't answer about various landscaping things. And I had just come down from that same silver maple. I was trimming it, and it was a high one. It was 80, 90 feet high. And I was just a skinny little kid, 160 pounds. It was hot, it was the summertime, and I trimmed it and worked my way down, and there's a pile of brush, and she walked up and she's talking to me. She said, "Oh my, that looks beautiful." And she's remarking about the tree and the nice job I did, and she looked up there, and I left a stub about that long, about that big around. And she said, "Oh gosh," she said, "look at you left that stub up there." And I looked at her and I thought, oh, and she back up to the top of that tree. I went to cut that one little stub off, you know. But she was a lady. You knew she was in charge. You knew she was the boss, and we referred to her as mother. We never called her that to her face, but that was an endearing term. We liked her. She was a nice lady, real class. She kind of put you in mind. And today you would think about Barbara Bush, that type of a person, a motherly type, in charge type person. And it was the same thing with the rabbits. The place was inundated with rabbits. And she wanted a vegetable garden, so she asked me if I plant a vegetable garden. Sure, I can do that. You know, I planted a bunch of beans and that type of thing. And about 14 days for beans to germinate, and they got up about that high, and I come out there one morning, they're all wiped off, and the rabbits had nibbled every single one of them off. So through her secretary, she got a permit from the conservation department that we could shoot rabbits out of season. She provided the ammunition. And my buddy and I, and well, there were 4 of us all together, 2 guys with guns and 2 were just stomping the brush, and we'd work the place in a perimeter. And we'd get 3 or 4 rabbits a day, and pretty soon we were starting to dwindle the population down. And then my shooting buddy and I got to talking. I said, you know, this is pretty neat, you know, a couple of kids getting paid for shooting, you know, for their first 2 hours rather than digging in the ground or climbing trees. We better start missing some of these. We're going to have this rabbit population cleaned out. So the first one that we chase up, he missed it by about 4 feet. The leaves fall off the tree, you know, and the boss says, "You guys you missed that one on purpose." He says, "Let's go back to work." So I put it into our rabbit hunting for a while.
Caught on to you.
Because he caught on to us. But every once in a while we'd have to go back to it because they just overrun the place.
Well, Harry, what about you? What are you going to tell us about some of the things?
Probably the most unusual thing that I've run into would be people that you meet nowadays and say, when I was a kid, I got on my bicycle and went down to the airport, and I was going to get some pictures. That stopped some dead-in-their tracks. Airport. We never had an airport. Oh, yes, we did. And it makes good conversation anyhow. And down on Jefferson Avenue, at 11.5 Mile Road, thereabout, across from the Lakeshore House, was a single-line family, had a home. Still down there, big cobblestone home, a lot of ironwork. And their son had an airplane, biplane that was made up in Marysville, Michigan by the Buell Hardware Company. So naturally, he had to have an airport, got to fly it from somewhere. And if you got your own airplane and your own airport, it's got to be a single-line airport. And it wasn't really an airport where you could fly off to Europe, but I guess nobody could in those days. But he was in and out of there, and it attracted a lot of other airplanes. They came and they picked up passengers. I suppose you could fly up to Marysville, Michigan. They flew the plane from there to start with, and if something went wrong, he always flew it back. But he had a lot of traffic in and out of there, weekends particularly. People coming out Jefferson, hey, airplane ride. And where the mobile gas, no, it isn't mobile gas, some gasoline station right next to the Lakeshore House now, that used to be a repair garage. And one of the fellows, Jimmy Wright, decided to build an airplane. And he built it right there. And for an engine, he picked up a 6-cylinder Chevrolet car engine. And I guess he drilled holes in that engine everywhere to make it lighter. And I used to go down and watch him when he tried to take off. Well, everyone called it Jimmy's Heavy Chevy Airplane. And it would get about a foot or 2 off the ground, what they called ground contact. And it wouldn't get any higher. He tried over and over. I often said that a lot of people I've known in the shores, when they get older, they move to Florida or somewhere else. And a few of them decide they're going to stay in the shores. I'm one of them. But nothing or nobody ever wanted to stay on the shores any harder than that airplane. That just stayed put. It wouldn't go out.
Wouldn't rise to the
But-
occasion.
He had a lot of planes that fly in there and go up to Harson's Island. There was a little landing strip up there, and fishermen they'd take up. And eventually he did have a rather bad plane crash, landed in the lake. There was a lot in the newspaper whether they were going to have to amputate his leg or not. They never did get around to saying whether they did or not. I didn't find out. But the man and the young girl who were flying as a passenger, the man was roughed up a little, and the girl was not actually hurt, but somebody with a lot of legal advice remembered that when she was 9 years old, she was pretty good at dancing, and they had a great future as a ballerina. And they decided they would sue the Single-Line family because of her ruined career. Single-Line family didn't fly the airplane, so they got out from under, and it did slow down the airport. And if you went down Jefferson Avenue then, between 10 and 11 Mile Road, Ardmore Park Avenue is there now. There was one street went down, one house on it, Spanish style, still there, and a man named E.A. Nelson lived in that house. He was an engineer with the Continental Motor people, and he had a theory that automobiles should be built like airplanes, quite powerful and very light. He had one of his own rear engine job that was real early Volkswagen, but looked more like an automobile. And then Continental decided to build aircraft engines. They still do today. But they bought a Waco cabin plane, pretty good size thing in its day, put one of their big engines in, and he used to fly this plane, that is, pardon me, Mr. Nelson flew it, to different places where he could sell the engine or sell the idea. So then the idea hit him, he could have his own airport. So he made a deal with the city of Detroit to bring out the rubbish and pay him $1 a load for dumping it. So they started at Jefferson and ran all the way down next to the Ardmore Street, right down to the lake, and a wee bit into the lake too. Then he had someone roll it flat, and naturally he now had Ardmore Airport. So he could fly home after work, and a lot of his friends flew in and out. On Sundays, they put a sign up on Jefferson Avenue, the big arrow pointing to it said airport, so you knew it was an airport. And in fact, I went down on that bicycle again, talked with a couple pilots who had what was called a Curtis Robin. This is a 4-passenger cabin ship. Same thing that Wrong-Way Caravan flew across the ocean. But they talked me into sitting in that plane and guarding it so that no one would disturb it. And they had to eat. The only place to eat then was 10 Mile in Jefferson. It's Pat O'Brien's now. In those days, it was Johnson's Restaurant. Harry Johnson's mother was a cook. And if you ate there, you came back. That was the place to eat. But this was a Friday night, and these pilots went down there. I suppose they ate. But on Friday night, all the local Frenchmen, Hank Mason's friends and everybody, went down and they played cards. They played a game named euchre. I don't know how it worked, but when you got the right cards, you jumped up in the air and you screamed, "By gar," and you pounded your fist on the table, and everybody thought, oh, that was great stuff. So these pilots realized they could make more money off of Hank Mason's friends than they could off of flying that airplane, so they didn't come back. I got home at 8 o'clock. I gave up. I don't know what they did with the plane. They could have given it away. But I got home late, got chewed out by my folks for not being there to eat. But the planes that came in and out of there regularly, it was an airport, one of the St. Clair Shore's second one. The thought came to my mind, at $1 a load, even today, I think Detroit would bring that rubbish out. If they hadn't put the houses down, they could run the runway right out to the middle of Lake St. Clair. We would be the only small-town airport that had maybe a 15,000-foot runway. You could fly to Europe from St. Clair Shores then. But they blew it. They began building houses. And in the wintertime, Lake St. Clair was an airport. The lake froze much better than it did now. People used to drive out hundreds of cars in the lake. You had to go way out because it froze to the bottom. and you went way out for fishing. You knocked a hole in it. There were ice boats going up and down, races. You could line the cars up and sit in your car out of the wind and watch the boats go by. And meanwhile, the fellows from the airports and from over in Roseville Airport would come and land on the lake. And of course, people out there for a nominal fee could get a free ride. And it was a pretty nice airport if you knew where to land on the lake without running down fishing houses and things. And the Hank Mason, one of the local boys, no, not Hank Mason. Sorry, Hank, I have you confused. Roy Visno, you know him?
Oh, yeah.
Roy Visno is the other old-timer in town. And he used to mention that there was a fella had an airplane out there called a Flying Flea. This was a very little plane. It was designed in France. You built it in your basement and put any sort of an engine, except a Chevrolet engine maybe, and you could fly it. It was a great engine, a great plane. They flew it out there, with the exception that if you climbed it too steeply, one wing hid behind the other and didn't get any lift, and the whole thing came down in a mess. The one in Lake St. Clair, it survived. There were hundreds of them crashed all over the world. But it was an airport on ice in a way. If you, pardon?
No, I was going to say, where did you live in St. Clair?
Roughly speaking, 11 Mile and Harper on the Davis subdivision. D.N. Davis was the village president. My father bought a home from him. And he was a good man to know as long as D.N. Davis was the village president. Now, when then an election, someone else became president, and they moved everything down to 9 Mile Road. This hurt me in a little way because at that time I was about a 15-year-old kid. I knew radio well enough that I used to install radios in one of the 2 police cars out here, and they'd come get me out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning if the thing quit, fix our radio. But of course, when D.N. Davis lost the election, I lost the job on the radios and everything with it because they all moved to the other end of town. But there was Harper Avenue went through. I moved out in the Shores in 1924. Harper went through around 1926. Incidentally, back to the airplanes, where Harper Avenue was, I used to fly kites. And these guys from Hartung's Airport, or it used to be old Packard Field over in Roseville, Gratiot 10.5 Mile, they would see me flying the kite. And this was a big joke. They'd swing down low, come in over tree tops, and the object was to wreck my kite. And I would have to pull the kite down. I was not happy about this. But it was a game they used to play. Kids with kites, let's see if we can dive down and get their kite. But when Harper went through, that was a big deal on Saturday and Sunday. Take your family from Detroit and go out to Mount Clemens. It was a nice road, easy going. So down by the 8 Mile Road limit, there was a Scully real estate company that had subdivided a section, but they never sold much. So they had a clear spot in there that they called Scully Field. And any of these barnstormer pilots used to land down there and try and get the $10 or whatever they could get out of the people who were going out to Mount Clemens. So it was sort of a borderline airport to add to our line. And you wouldn't call it an airport if a plane came in, landed, forced landing, and was able to fly out later when they fixed the engine. But we had quite a few of those around town.
Hank, would you say, when Harper Avenue way back when your family had the farms here and that, did Harper always go through to where it is today? How far out did it go? Harper Avenue.
Harper Avenue went all the way to Mount Clemens.
It always went all the way to Mount
Oh,
Clemens.
it always went to Mount Clemens, yeah. We used to hitch rides on our bicycles on the trucks.
Was it gravel then, or what was it?
It was nothing. It was field, farm.
Harper was?
Yeah, there was nothing there. That was all field. I have pictures of that. I had half a dozen pictures, I guess, where it showed them where they cut the trees down and everything.
When they paved it,
right
that
through
was
Cushies.
1926.
Yeah. Now, Harper, Detroit was there, but I don't know how far out it run this way. It didn't go through the shore, I know that.
So
I think it was
just,
28, wasn't it?
About 26, 28?
26,
something like
28, yeah.
26.
I have all the pictures there, the paving and so forth.
And then what about Jefferson?
Oh, Jefferson always was there.
Always paved? Was it paved?
Oh, no, no, that was gravel. That's when I knew it. And then after gravel, it was something like blacktop, because I remember riding in the trucks when they blacktopped it, you know. And it was a small lane. It wasn't very big, very wide.
Because I remember seeing some pictures of Harper when they did Harper back in 2019. I think they
I
were.
think it was 26.
26.
26 or 28. Did I give you some pictures
You
of
gave me
that?
that photograph where all the,
Aid and all them were in there?
yeah, all the commissioners were standing up in front of the pavement equipment. That was the first time it was paved.
Yeah, that's
In
true to
51
sure,
it was
yeah.
paved again, or somewhere in there, 53. somewhere
Cut right
there.
through Cushy's farm,
Yeah.
a 13-mile road.
So your family and the Champagne family, when you say you're the original families out there, so you guys have sold off. When did they start selling off your farms and that? What years?
Oh, gosh, I couldn't say.
Had to
I
be.
couldn't say. I've got pictures of the farms, the people on the farms, but that's when my mother was young, before I was born.
This
I couldn't say when they did it.
was this mostly French settlement out here?
Yeah, yeah.
Mostly all French.
An awful lot of French, yeah.
I was the German, and believe me, you let me know
There was a
about it
few
in school.
Germans.
So you were an outcast.
You better have.
I was telling Gus
was the
before.
only other German in town. We had to form a club of our own.
I was telling Gus before when I was young, I peddled papers. I lived on Dorian and Jefferson, and I had just about everybody from 13-mile road to 12-mile road, from where Harper is now to Jefferson, and I had 62 customers. I peddled the News, the Free Press, and the Times.
Is that right?
In the wintertime, we used to use a horse and stone boat through the fields.
Oh, I know what a stone bolt is, and I know what all that stuff is.
That's
We did
right.
that too when we were younger.
Yeah, snow was too deep.
Yeah.
They had mean dogs then, too. I got bit a couple times.
But it's really amazing when you sit back and you think about the history of this city, and there's so much to tell about the history of this city.
Well, it's one of the older cities, you know. As Detroit built, we came out. East Detroit, Roseville, all these cities, they came way after. That was in the 50s where they even started to be. Well, East Detroit was halfway. That was halfway between Detroit and Mount Clemens. But
Well, you know, when you think, there were some interesting things, like we had Tom Welsh on the show, and he talked about how the Blue Goose was brought over, the main building was brought over from Harson's Island.
Yeah.
And just different things like that that are a part of the old, you know, the history of the city. We're gonna have to close here in a minute or two, but we're gonna try to do more of these types of shows and bring on more people to talk about the history of this city and where it is. And I think that some of the stuff is very interesting that you could take to the schools, and you know that the schools could talk up to the kids out there a little bit about the history of here, right here in St. Clair Shores, because there's a tremendous amount of history out here
lot of
that people don't know about, you know. And
we've got a lot of mushrats to tell it too.
and
so-
all, yeah.
I've got a decoy home, a duck decoy that belonged to an Indian. The Indian gave it to old Frank Snee. Frank would have been, possibly 120, 130 now. He gave me that years ago. I still have it home. It's wore out real bad. The only change, somebody put eyes in it.
Is that right?
But he says he got this from an Indian boy playing in back of Lake Shore houses.
Isn't that something? Well, we've got to wrap it up now, and I want to thank you all for being on the show, and certainly we're going to get you back again, and we'll try to do a few of these shows and talk about and bring in some more of the history of the city. And I want to thank Comcast and the Cable TV Commission, the St. Clair Shores Cable Commission, who sponsor and put this show on and invite you as the guest to be on here. So we'll look forward to doing more shows. And Gus, thank you for your efforts in putting a lot of it together. And
It's our pleasure.
We'll be back.
Great.
Thank you very
Great.
much.
We thank you.
Okay, thank you.
It was the only place we could find it at, and the pharmacist was great keeping it in stock for us the entire time we needed it. He was terrific.